Welcome to this explainer. Right now, an incredibly intense wave of socio-political unrest is sweeping through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, or PoK. We're talking massive street protests, heavy military crackdowns, and escalating violence that's really capturing global attention. But what is actually driving all of this? Well, today, we're going to dig straight into the facts, the history, and the lived reality on the ground to unpack the deep-rooted causes behind this highly complex crisis. So let's start with a really compelling question. How exactly does a local, everyday plea for something like cheaper electricity snowball into a heavy-handed military crackdown and sweeping constitutional challenges? It's a fascinating and honestly quite sobering look at how ignored civilian grievances can rapidly transform into a fierce demand for fundamental rights. To really wrap our heads around this, we'll be covering 6 key areas: the boiling point, the illusion of autonomy, the 12 reserved seats, echoes of 1947, the economics of exploitation, and finally, a critical turning point. Let's get into it.
Part 1. The boiling point, from flower to freedom.
The real driving force behind this movement is a group called the Joint Awami Action Committee, or the JAAC. Formed recently in 2023, it's essentially a grassroots coalition of local traders, lawyers, and civil society members. And, they originally just rallied for basic economic relief. But as they continuously hit a brick wall with the administration, they realized something absolutely crucial. Fighting for cheaper bills wasn't enough. Deeper, structural political reform was the only way they were going to see lasting change. That brings us to part 2, the illusion of autonomy, Muzaffarabad versus Islamabad. Now, on paper, the local setup in Muzaffarabad boasts an impressive level of self-governance. I mean, they literally have their own prime minister, a president, and even their own Supreme Court. Sounds great, right? But here's the catch. In reality, Islamabad retains ultimate strategic and financial control. The central government dictates all the crucial portfolios: defense, foreign affairs, currency. So for local activists, this creates a highly frustrating sort of mirage of autonomy. Moving on to part 3, the 12 reserved seats, representation or control. Okay, this legislative structure is a massive flashpoint right now. Let's do some quick math. Out of the 53 seats in the local assembly, citizens who actually live within the region only directly vote for 33 of them. Another 8 are reserved for specific demographics like women and technocrats. But the real controversy, that lies with the remaining 12 refugee seats. These 12 seats are controlled by voters who reside entirely outside the region. We're talking about refugees settled primarily in central provinces like Punjab and Sindh. You can imagine the frustration here. Local residents argue that because these voters don't face the daily on-the-ground struggles of the region, outside interests from places like Karachi and Lahore are directly and unfairly influencing their local governance. So, what happens when citizens challenge this unfair representation? Well, they took it locally to their own Supreme Court, and they were struck down. The court ruled that these seats are a fixed constitutional arrangement and cannot be removed. By slamming those legal doors shut, the authorities essentially left the citizens feeling completely unheard. And honestly, that legal dead end is what really sparks the massive street protests we are seeing today. Part 4, Echoes of 1947, the historical roots. To really get the why behind all this, we have to rewind. Prior to 1947, this was a princely state under Hari Singh. Following independence, the area faced a rapid tribal invasion, which led Hari Singh to sign the Instrument of Accession to India. This intense domino effect sequence of events triggered the First War in 1948, ultimately resulting in the regional division that still exists today. So back to those 12 controversial refugee seats. Why do they still exist decades later? Well, originally, Pakistan created them to grant political rights to migrants. But legal experts point to a much deeper strategy on the geopolitical chessboard. Maintaining these seats helps preserve the international narrative that Kashmir remains a disputed territory. Basically, the establishment fears that abolishing them would severely weaken its global stance. So the seats stay, despite the intense local backlash. Next up, Part 5, the economics of exploitation, the Mangla Dam paradox. This is probably one of the most visible points of anger. The Mangala Dam on the Jhelum River is the ultimate paradox. Locals literally sacrificed their land to build it. Huge areas were submerged, whole families were displaced. Yet the immense hydroelectric power it generates is routed out to external beneficiaries in Punjab and Sindh. Meanwhile, the locals who gave up their land are hit with absolutely exorbitant electricity bills.
It's a glaring economic disparity that has become a major rallying cry.
And it's not just the power bills. The Jocks' grievances cover a whole spectrum of daily survival struggles. They are protesting irregular supplies and high prices for subsidized wheat, crumbling infrastructure, a near-total lack of private industry, and skyrocketing youth unemployment. It is, quite frankly, a perfect storm of economic hardship.
Finally, Part 6, a critical turning point, looking across the border.
So, how did the authorities respond to these root grievances? With severe force. First, citizens just demanded economic relief. Second, instead of negotiating, the administration completely banned the JAC and arrested its leaders under anti-terror charges. Third, massive security forces were deployed, which tragically led to lethal clashes. Rather than quelling the unrest, this heavy-handed approach just poured fuel on the fire and further radicalized the movement.
And now, there's a very real risk of a contagion effect. The source material highlights that the neighboring Gilgit-Baltistan region shares many of these exact same economic and political grievances. They are watching Muzaffarabad very, very closely right now. If the central government mismanages this, it could easily spark a much wider regional uprising.
Furthermore, we are seeing a really stark cross-border comparison playing out. Thanks to the internet and social media, protesters are actively contrasting their own lack of development and autonomy with the financial allocations and major infrastructure growth happening right across the border in Indian-administered Jammu and Kashmir. Seeing that visible disparity in quality of life is heavily, heavily fueling the local anger.
Which ultimately leaves us with a massive question. As deep economic exploitation collides with total political disillusionment, are we witnessing a permanent fracture in the region's relationship with Islamabad? Does this represent an irreversible shift in their demand for genuine fundamental rights? It's an incredibly complex situation that will undoubtedly shape the future of this entire region. Thank you so much for joining me for this Explainers. Keep asking those tough questions, and I'll catch you next time.